I'm Jeremy Scott. I'm a tarot coach, spiritual philosopher, and an intuitive thinker. And I'm using this platform to raise awareness that as the Earth re-emerges from everything that's been going on recently into perhaps a new way of living, what do we need to do? What direction are we going to go in so that we can all live together in a more peaceable, unifying, nurturing and cooperative way, so that we can focus on the things that bring us together rather than the things that divide us? So I'm using this platform to raise awareness about these issues and others that are related to that. Welcome to Re-Emerging Earth. You know, time as we think of it doesn't actually exist. And why is that? Why can I say that? You say, I'll look at my mobile phone or my watch and I can see time. I look at clocks in the high streets or railway stations. I can see time. Can you really? Time is an invention. We as humans invented time to either segment our lives in a more controllable way or to allow others to control our lives in the same way through using time. Time is linear, and since we began as humans on this planet, and variations differ, whether that's you believe that's 5,000-6,000 years ago, or whether it's 200,000+ years ago, or millions of years ago, whatever, we have been trying to find a way to control time. Way back when, it was a lot simpler, because time was basically based on the sun rising and setting, the moon cycles and seasons, and that's how we lived, in a more simpler and, I suppose, in many ways beneficial way as well, because we didn't allow time to control our lives entirely like we do today. We worked with time, if you like, in that way, by observing the seasons, by observing the moon cycles and the daily rising and setting of the sun. Much in the same way that animals do. You know, they know time in their own way through the exact same methods. That's why you have animals and flowers and plants and trees who go dormant during the winter months as a protection, and they know when to reawaken in the springtime weather, when the weather starts to warm and they can thrive and start to grow again, or to wake up and start feeding again and carry out mating rituals and so on. Then there are those who are like us, who are present all year round, and we use those cycles, seasonal cycles, to grow food, to gather food, to build shelters to see us through the stormier times, the winter and spring times when the weather can be very inclement. And we've learned over the years how to deal with such things. Then, several hundred years ago, maybe a couple of thousand years ago, whatever, we started to try to control time. We invented all kinds of devices to track time, to try to split the day up into segments so that we could more accurately predict this, that or the other. especially when it came to meeting times and meeting people and so on. And these things range from a stick in the ground, where it would be in the center of a circle, and the shadow of the stick would denote the time of day, to sundials, which used the same kind of principle. They were mainly in gardens, on pedestals, not very transportable. Then you had those who invented the mobile sundials, or the pocket sundials if you wish, and they could be used to set times and so on. And time has proved, controlling time in this way has proved useful for wayfarers, for seafarers and so on, so that they could arrive at destinations. They knew how long it would take to transport goods, to be at a certain place at a certain time, to pick up fresh goods and so on. And they'd be able to navigate by the stars and use the stars as well, and the moon and all kinds of things like that. So I'm not saying that the way that we control time is necessarily something that's not very good, because it has its purposes. But time as we have it, obviously today we've got even more accurate ways of denoting what time it is, to interpret the tracking of the sun and the moon and the stars and things like that, using GPS systems and satellites of all sorts, and watches and clocks and mobile phones and things like that. And we can pinpoint wherever we are in the world, what time it is, in accordance with how things play out in our part of the world. And here in the UK, more recently, you could say, in the sense of last 150 years or so, when trains and that started running, when they built the railways, every area had its own time zone. So there was a lot of confusion about time and how to navigate each town and city in an accurate way to avoid accidents and catastrophes and so on. So time and travel is very much related in that way as well. And eventually, we came up with the Greenwich Mean Time, and that became the standard UK time, not only for United Kingdom but for many parts of the world. They base their time on that because of its accurate precision timing. And every country, each area, like you get, say, United States, every state practically has its own time zone, or it's 2 or 3 states in one particular time zone, like Pacific time or West Coast time or whatever, mountain time, whatever you want to call it. All these kind of ways of measuring time. And that kind of allows us to control our lives, and as I said before, allows others to control our lives as well, because we have to be there at a certain time for certain appointments. We have to be there to pick up payments. Things have to be paid on this date at this time and so on. Calendars were the same kind of thing as time. In that way, it was a way of controlling lives, either by choice or voluntarily allowing others to do it on our behalf. So, when spiritual teachers say we have to be mindful and be in the now part of time, in the present moment, this kind of opens up another aspect, doesn't it? This kind of opens up a different way of viewing time. And just as an aside, for me, time, as I said, doesn't really exist in the way that we view it. It exists in the vast spiritual sense of time, in the sense of past, present and future are all in the now. And Eckhart Tolle also teaches this. If you're thinking about the past, that thought you're having is now, in the present. So your past is now. If you're thinking about the future, that's also a thought of the future that you are having in the present, in the now. So all things happen in the now, and that's what Eckhart Tolle teaches. And certainly that is something that over time I have certainly seen and experienced and come to believe as well. I'm kind of revisiting the teachings of Eckhart Tolle at the moment. I started to look into them a few years ago, then kind of wandered away, if you like, onto other things. But I've come back to his teachings, seeing the sense of it. I started looking into the now, the mindfulness side of things when I was learning Reiki, and certainly with the style of Reiki that I was learning at that time, of which I've now achieved master teacher status, or that is just a bit of paper that says I've done this, that and the other and qualified as a master teacher. In actual fact, you can never be a true master of Reiki, because none of us can control the energy that we work with. But it's a title. I looked into the mindfulness side of things back then when I was learning, because the style of Reiki that I studied was more about personal and spiritual growth and development, and that was of more interest to me than using the Reiki energy itself for healing and practicing in that way, although I did and still do use those Reiki practices in my life, and occasionally to help others as well when I send out distant healing and things like that. But my main focus was on personal and spiritual growth, which is the way Mikao Usui taught his students, and that was the emphasis back then. That's why you have the Reiki precepts, so that you could focus on them over time until you were happy that you had really got not control's the wrong word, got the, not even mastery, you were happy with the way it was working out in your life. You felt, now I have come to a certain point where I can now move on to the next precept, that kind of thing. But that's where I started getting into Eckhart Tolle and his teachings back then, and also in line with the mindfulness. And then I moved on to other things, and more recently I've started to get back into it again, and I'm finding it fascinating to have my mind refreshed about the teachings and the wisdom of his teachings as well. I mean, I don't put them on a pedestal, I don't put them on some kind of glorified sort of glass case and bow down to him. Yeah, it's not that kind of worship or anything like that. I just respect him as a great spiritual teacher. Yeah, and his wisdom, the way he puts things across is excellent. But he is very much about in the now, being in the present. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be in the now? Does it simply mean we should just be focused and concentrated on what we're doing and ignore all the distractions, and we're so focused so that the end of an hour we've got a splitting headache because we're so focused? No. Being present. It's another great spiritual teacher put it so beautifully. This was Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, who's considered to be one of the leading teachers of mindfulness in this day and age. He said once that mindfulness was the same as washing the dishes to wash the dishes. And what does that mean? You might say, well, I'll just put my dishes in the dishwasher. How is that mindful? But we're talking about washing the dishes as we used to do, and some of us still do, by hand. And being aware of what we're doing in that moment. I mean, personally, it's something I've done as a child. It was part of my chores, if you like, after every meal, along with my brother, to wash up. And I preferred to wash rather than dry. No, because I felt that sense of achievement of seeing those plates, those bowls, those pans becoming clean after getting rid of all the residue of the food and the burnt on offerings and stuff, that comes about. And I enjoyed that challenge, especially with the tougher ones where the pans or the pots had maybe a little bit of burnt offering in them, and to be able to get those nice and clean and shiny. I found that as an achievement. I also found it very therapeutic. Now, right back then, even as a young lad, I'd be very mindful of what I was doing, and that's what Thich Nhat Hanh means. You are mindful, you are fully aware of what it is that you are doing in any given time. With washing the dishes, you need to be mindful. Many of us, myself included at times, but many of us, if we're washing the dishes, our mind isn't on the task at hand. It's on what Netflix program is coming up, what we're going to have later on for food or snacks, who we're going to meet tomorrow, what the boss said today which upset us, all those kinds of things. Why are the children being so noisy? And that's when, certainly in my case, what I found is when you take your mind away from the task in hand, that's when I get chips and cracks and even break dishes. Because I let them slip, or they bang against other dishes or cups or whatever, or the side of the sink and things like that, and they get damaged. And that is also always for me a reminder to get back into the zone, so to speak, to be mindful, to be aware of what it is I'm doing. So being mindful, being in the now, is being present with what you're doing. So is it always beneficial? For the most part, yes, it is beneficial, very beneficial, because when you're in that aware state, your senses are heightened. When you're in the moment and you're outside, such as I am whilst I'm recording this, yes, I am aware that I am recording this. I am aware of what I'm saying. I am aware of the different thoughts that are trying to push their way in to distract me. I just allow them to slip by because they're not needed right now. But I'm also aware of the things that are going on around me. The traffic on the nearby road, the builders across the street doing some construction work, the birds, the crows crowing, other birds singing, shouting out to each other, calling out to each other, chasing away cats, the breeze blowing through the long grass here where I am, and the whispering of that voice. I'm aware, but I'm not focusing on those things, but I am aware of them because my senses are heightened. The sun as it comes out through the clouds to warm me and so on. The colours, the smells of the place where I am at this moment in time, the beautiful flowers and trees and things. I'm aware of all these things, but I'm also very mindful that I'm recording a podcast. I'm also very mindful of my track of thought and what I want to say next. Although I am allowing that in that mindful way to flow in a more natural way, because I'm not thinking, right, I've got to say this, I've got to say that, I've got to say the other. I'm allowing it to flow, and let's see where it goes in that way. So I'm being very mindful, or as mindful as possible, and that's how we can all benefit in that way. When you're driving, and hopefully that is the case, you're very mindful then. You are in the now, because you're focusing on the road ahead, you're focusing on the traffic, and perhaps focus is the wrong word. You are aware of where you're going and what's going on around you. You know, some say that we tend to drive like automatons. We drive somewhere and then suddenly realize, well, how did I get here? I don't remember the journey. That's when you're not in the now. That's because your mind is somewhere else and not on the task at hand. And that's when your subconscious takes over to keep you alive. It makes automatic suggestions or takes automatic actions to keep you alive and on the road and free from accidents. Doesn't always work, as we know. But when you are aware driving your car, when you're in the now, you remember the journey. You remember maybe one or two of the cars or vehicles that you've passed. You remember seeing perhaps some animals on the roadside and things like that. You remember hearing funny noises from your engine, you know, and you're wondering what they are. Yeah. So you're aware of what you're doing at any one time. Your senses are heightened, so that if something suddenly does happen, such as another vehicle pulling out in front of you, or you know, you're in an open top car and the rain starts, that kind of thing, you suddenly become aware and you know exactly what to do at any given moment. You know, to take avoiding action or to rectify the situation. Being in the now is something natural. We do it naturally. We do it in a way that we're not really fully aware of it, but we are in the now. When we become engrossed in a film or a movie or a conversation or a show that we're watching live, we're in that now. Because, or it could be, say, at work or at home, and you're carrying out a project, something you really enjoy doing, or something that needs to be done, and you suddenly look up and say, wow, the time's flown by. And that's because you've been in the now, but in a focused way. So you've been really focusing on what you're doing, and for some that may mean you get a headache, you know, because you've been concentrating so much. But if it's something you really enjoy doing, you've been aware, in many cases, you've been aware of what's going on around you. I mean, you could be watching, say, your favourite movie or a movie, you're really into it, you know, and people, maybe family members, bring you something to drink or eat or whatever, you know, and you're aware of that. Yeah, and you say thank you or whatever, you know, as you do. But then you're back into the movie, the plot, and you're following along and enjoying all the things that are happening there, but you're aware of all the situations that are going on. So we do it in a natural way. It's not always beneficial, like I say, because we see many people these days walking along the road looking at their mobile devices. And it's not just young people, it's people of all ages. You know, I've seen people of all ages doing this. You know, and they're so focused on the mobile devices, you know, watching looking through their Facebook feed or Twitter or TikTok, watching videos and things like that. They're not watching where they're going. And many times the only reason, same as when you're in the car, and you're too busy distracted by other thoughts and things that are happening, the only reason they don't get run over when they go over a road or something like that is because the subconscious kicks in and stops them, suddenly wakes them up, kind of thing, so that they realise, oh, I'm at a road, I need to press the button to cross. Or they just narrowly avoid an object like a pole or some other car or something like that. So in that way, being too focused can be detrimental, can be not very beneficial at all. So we have to be, I suppose, a little way careful with that. But being in and now, being present, is, as I said, being aware of not only what you're doing, but what's going on around you as well. But your main focus, if you like, your attention remains mainly on what it is that you are doing. You know? Some people call it half listening, if they're doing, say, going back to the washing up, they're doing the washing up, but they're half listening to the news while they're focusing or being mindful of what they're doing. Or they could be doing some other activity, they're half listening to the radio, and then maybe something said, or a piece of music comes on, or something happens that requires their full attention. So then their awareness there now shifts to that particular moment. So time, going back to time is now. Everything is in the now. Everything we do, say, think is in the now. And there's no way around that. Your now, at this moment in time as you listen to this podcast, is different from the now for when you started to listen to this podcast. That now has shifted. It's constantly changing. So when you have other spiritual teachers who say, oh, you have to meditate on the now. For me, that's a wasteful exercise. Not the meditation itself, because I enjoy meditating, but meditating on the now is pretty much not impossible, but very difficult, because it's shifting. Which now are you going to meditate on? Is it now? Now? 3-4 different nows, or more. It's constantly like that. It's constantly changing. So to meditate on the now is very difficult. I won't say impossible. I just did, but I won't say impossible, because anything is possible in the right space, in the right environment. You can, in a sense, meditate on the now by being aware of where you are at the present, in the present moment. And that is how I would do it. I mean, I wouldn't sit down and, or lie down, or however it is you meditate, and just focus on one particular point in time. Because even that is changing. If you're focusing, say, for example, if you're trying to let go of something that no longer serves you, so you're focusing on that in a mindful way, which is great, but I would say, which part of that are you going to focus on? Because the whole narrative that plays out, it plays across a whole series of nows. So rather than say to yourself, I'm going to focus on the present, and going to use that to let go of that thing that's been bothering me all these years, why not just meditate on visiting that particular situation and letting it go in that way. And one of the finer ways or better ways I've found to do that is, yes, to go back to that time or to think about that time and forgive yourself. Love, forgive and accept yourself at that particular time when the incident happened. And I say that regardless of who the perpetrator was, whether it was you or others. I say that because you love, forgive and accept that you allowed others to hurt you, say bad things to you, do something to you, got you riled up, triggered you, those kinds of things. You allowed them to do that. And that could be perhaps a topic for another podcast when we're talking about how perhaps the things that we think, the things that we focus on, we also reflect out, and they materialize in the material world. So that's perhaps for another time. Yeah, another time, which brings us back to time. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this podcast and have a better idea of how being in the now works. And I look forward to sharing more views and insights with you at a future time, or should I say in a future now. Thank you very much. Bye.